Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go-around is Jane Labowitch, better known as Princess Etch. So as the royal name implies, she is an artist that uses an etch-a-sketch as her medium. In this chat, I follow her down the rabbit hole on how each etch performs differently and how it takes time to find the right one for the job, right? Some have better lines, some are thinner lines, some have better controls, right? It's very interesting to my brain. So she also shares how each video you see is backed by hours upon hours of work that are completely invisible to all of us. So, man, I love artists and the time they put into creating entertaining things for us. At any rate, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jane.
Yeah, I'm actually a late riser, which is why I usually request for afternoon things in all of my scheduling. I'm more of a night owl, which is great since I'm a freelancer and can accommodate that.
It's increasingly
recording in progress.
More and more people I interact with and work with are, because I work with programming nerds and stuff like that on a day-to-day basis, and they seem to be most productive from 10 at night till about 3 or 4 in the morning.
Yes, that's my second shift is usually from 11 to 3 is when I get a lot of my best work done, because I think it's just, I don't know, the rest of the day is there's less distractions at night, and I feel like I'm in a better flow state, and I prefer it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. The world goes to sleep so that they can stay awake, I guess.
Yeah.
You guys are wacky. Not me. I'm an old man. I like my sleep, so.
Oh, it's been tough trying to better accommodate society. I live with my boyfriend, and he's a 9-to-5er, and we actually have quite opposite sleep schedules. During weekdays, we might only spend 2 or 3 hours a day together because otherwise, he goes to bed by midnight, and he might get home from work rather late, and we'll have one meal together, and then on the weekends is when we spend the most of our time together.
That's crazy. You know what? We're already into it. Do you want to just let's just jump in, because you're giving me good stuff, and I can't throw this out. Jane, it's too good. Is it cool if I refer to you as Jane?
Yes, yeah, totally cool.
All right. Some people want to go by their, pseudonym. Is that the word for it?
Yeah. I respond to both. So Princess Etch and Jane are equally responsive for me.
All right, cool. Well, I'll put your name on here as Princess Etch, but I'll call you Jane. So let's do the thing. We're already in it. Everybody knows what your name is. Everybody's heard the sound of your voice. So I'm going to give you the preamble is whenever I do these things, I don't ask a lot of I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. Don't get me wrong. But it's not the same question every time. The only one question I ask everybody, and genuinely, I love saying this to people in real life. You find your tribe pretty quick doing this kind of thing, is I just like to ask people who they are. So, Jane, who are you?
Well, I guess I would start that question with my occupation, which
Sure.
is an etch-a-sketch artist and self-appointed royalty. I am Princess Etch, and I am a silly human being. I have managed for the last 7 years to make a career out of being an etch-a-sketch artist, and I guess if I were to define who I was beyond that, I would say a creative, friendly, fun human being that likes to come up with wacky, zany ideas and commit to the bit as hard as she can.
Yes, and I dig it. I dig it. There's not very many people in life that really just want to kind of go along for the ride, man. I can super respect that.
Yeah, I think when I look back at everything I've done in my life and where my career has taken me, I've realized that my biggest highlights are when I have most committed to the bit, when I've taken an idea and just gone as hardcore with it as I possibly could. And that's something that I think actually has very little to do with my career as an etch-a-sketch artist. It's just that etch-a-sketch has sort of become the conduit for which I express that desire to take an idea and just push it as far as I can go.
All right. Well, you keep saying commit to the bit. It makes me wonder, at what point does it stop being a bit? I mean, you've been doing this for 7 years. It doesn't sound like it's a bit anymore, dude.
No, for sure, for sure. I mean, as far as my life's passion goes, Etch-a-Sketch, I'm all in on it. It's what I do. It's what I love. But I think when I look at where I've had my biggest successes in my career, because as a freelancer, it's been very like peaks and valleys. I think a lot of my peaks have been when I've gone on bizarre little adventures with my work, like I had this more recently, I started getting into live streaming, and around a year and a half ago, I decided to see if it was possible to pay off my student loans through live streaming on TikTok. And this is when like nobody was really using TikTok as a streaming platform, and just creating this ridiculous thermometer that registered the unit of currency on TikTok, which is like the cheapest gift you could send is a rose. And just using my Etch-a-Sketch art as the conduit for like doing the entertainment during the live streaming and seeing like, can I finish paying my student loans just through streaming on this like newfangled platform? And then finding out, yeah, and other people were down for it because it was such a strange idea. And so for me, I think that my career flourishes at its most when I have those, I guess, kind of bolt of lightning ideas. But when I have those just newfound concepts that are just like, let's see how far we can take it. Like recently I was visiting family in Michigan. I live in Maryland now. And I was flying home, and I'm trying to do a better job as a creative person to find opportunity in otherwise looked over circumstances. And so I was on my plane. It was like, I don't know, a 2-hour flight. And I had an Etch-a-Sketch on me, and I thought, like, how far can I get through the Pokédex? Just the original 151 Pokemon on an Etch-a-Sketch. And so under normal circumstances, I would be like doom scrolling on my phone or just watching something on the United app flying home. But instead, I was like rapidly working on these minute little Pokemon drawings for like 2 hours. I was like the only person on the plane in the back corner with my light on. I'm sure my neighbor thought I was crazy. And I was just like ravenously trying to get through as much of the Pokédex as I possibly could. And the flight went by like that, of course, because I was racing against the clock, and I got off the flight like stressed, but it was awesome. And for me, those are the things that like I aspire to do the most with my career, is find those weird kooky ideas. And to me, like, the success doesn't come from like, oh, did it go viral? It comes from like, oh, well, how proud am I of the final concept? And so, as I'm proceeding with my career, I'm trying to tap into that more and tap less into the allure of trying to follow a trend or like repeat the success of a path that someone else has already forged.
Interesting. So that so many interesting questions pop into mind. One is like, I'm assuming, like, if you do this stuff in public, it must really generate attention. People, I mean, are naturally curious, right? And has that become like a conduit for you to, I don't know, have interesting conversations?
Yes, definitely. I don't go out and etch in public too often. It's kind of like, it's akin to a painter goes out and paints plein air. But I have in the past, and it's one of my favorite things to do, because most of the time I'm working from home, I'm in my office. It can be quite a lonely existence being an artist. Even as a child, I think I look back on some of my earliest memories, and it would be me drawing in solitude. And for me, I'm a naturally social person. I would consider myself definitely more on the extroverted side of the spectrum. So anytime I go out with my Etch-a-Sketch, it's usually quite a joy. And it's quite an unfettered joy too, because it's so novel, and people I think find it really approachable, because I'm usually wearing like bright fun colors, and I'm just keeping to myself drawing something. Like, I've gone to museums and done this, and I think, people just naturally kind of find themselves gravitated toward it and start asking questions. And some of my best memories in my career are conversations that I've just had sitting next to complete strangers. Like one time I was working on an etch-a-sketch drawing at the Art Institute of Chicago because I used to live in Chicago. And I was just about to finish it. I'd been working on it for like 8 hours over the
Wow.
course of multiple sittings. And there was this man who was probably in his 60s or so. And I was sitting at a bench and the museum was about to close. It was my favorite time to go because usually within the last half hour at the Art Institute, the crowds really die down. So there are literally less people blocking my view
Hmm.
during that time. So this band comes and he sits down next to me, and it's just the two of us in the gallery, and it's really quieting down. And I'm finishing up the last parts, and he explains that he's from Spain and he got access to an etch-a-sketch back in like the 60s. And they didn't start manufacturing it in Spain under its Spanish name, Telesketch, until like I would say the 70s or 80s. So he had this premier access to this foreign toy that none of his friends had ever seen. And he was just telling me stories of what it was like being a kid growing up with this toy that none of his friends have ever heard of. It's like, it kind of reminds me of like in the 90s, if you got like a Tamagotchi from Japan or something before it hit the US, right? All the kids in the neighborhood are like, whoa, what is that? And and we're just having this like lovely conversation about this shared connection from our youth when we come from countries away. And then we sat together and I finished the drawing and he got to be there to be like the first one to see it completed. And it's moments like that that are just like, that really make going out worth it. I once had a man sit next to me skeptical, being like, why are you doing this? Why couldn't you just be at home? And he kind of came at it from a little bit of an antagonistic standpoint. And I'm like, I could be doing this at home. In fact, it would be a lot easier, but I wouldn't be able to converse with you if I did that. And I find I've had people who come at me with skepticism, like, what's your angle? What are you trying to sell? And that's valid because there's, you can kind of have a narrative to anything. And it's like, well, I'm doing it for the experience. And I've met I had a photographer who's known for shooting like tennis matches in Wimbledon who just happened upon me and like took photos of me working. And I met someone who is an award-winning illustrator who we now send each other Christmas cards every year. And I met him because I found out he was drawing me while I was drawing a painting at the museum. And it's just you never know who you're gonna meet when you go out and just put yourself out there. And I think as artists, especially, I don't know many people who do that. I'm guilty of staying inside too much myself, but I think that artists, when they mingle in society, it's awesome. And we need to be doing that more because artists add a lot of fun and flair to the lives of those around them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely approaching things from a different perspective. But I like what you said right there. You said, the person that was skeptical, why are you doing this out in public? We wouldn't be having this conversation. And it sounds like you've made like real legitimate human connections with other people through this
Yeah.
medium. I think it's something else that's really interesting. Earlier, as you were talking about your the fella from Spain, and you said it was a foreign toy. And I think it's interesting to hear you call it a toy. Does it feel like a toy? Like, do you still think of it in your mind as a toy, or is it like you're just your medium that you work in?
I would say it's both because I still collect it as well.
Hmm.
So I see it as it is an interesting point. First and foremost, I think I treat it like a canvas.
Hmm.
And the way that I speak about it when using it for art is very technical. Like every etch-a-sketch truly is a unique canvas. Sometimes I feel like a wine connoisseur and that I could like identify a vintage by like its feel and
Really?
the visual characteristics. Yeah, like there are certain eras of Etch-a-Sketch that I desire to work on more because I know that like those manufacturing dates were like the sweet spot
Huh.
for the functionality of the unit. Um, there are certain sizes that can be more fraught with like historic technical problems. So I'm like more wary about purchasing them online. A lot of them aren't as accessible as they used to be because a lot of them have been discontinued, or they would come out with a certain color in a certain year. And so it's something that, like, from a collector standpoint, I still look at it as a toy, even like as an item for display. But I feel like I do predominantly treat it like a canvas with all of its unique quirks, which can be beneficial and detrimental because sometimes you just want the perfect canvas every time. And you don't get that with Etch-a-Sketch because at the end of the day, it is a mass-produced, manufactured toy. And human beings are actually quite heavily involved in the production and assembling of the toy. There is a lot of it that I don't think can be completely automated with it. You know, the parts might have been automated in their production, but when you have to put it all together, it's like a secret sauce that, you know, maybe at some point they were able to automate some of the final steps, but you can tell, like, it's interesting. You can tell that, like for example, they just came out with these Elf Edition Etch-a-Sketches, and they're super awesome. Of course, I mean, I think they're all awesome, but the like cosmetically they look different because there's like really cool decals on the sides that are like themed from the movie Elf. But functionality wise, the new pockets, which are this size, they just work like a dream. Like the line is so nice and thin. And, you know, there have been minute differences in the quality of Etch-a-Sketch over the years. And, you know, when I first used the Elf Etch-a-Sketch, I'm like, oh, man, I wish they all were like this. Like, this is it. This is what I want. So it's, yeah. So I guess it's nuanced. I would lean more toward canvas than toy, but I think colloquially, I'm just very comfortable referring to it as a toy. Like, for me, it's not something that, even though I also said I compared it to wine, I think that I almost feel like in a way I'm in on the joke. Like I take my work seriously and I'm proud of the work I do, but I also recognize that the choice of medium is very lowbrow. And I like that about it. So I think that it's kind of one of those things that I find it silly and fun, and you could be serious about being silly.
Lowbrow. I don't know that lowbrow is the way I would describe it. I would say accessible. It feels accessible to just about anybody. You know what I mean? Like pretty much anybody can just pick it up as long as you have 2 digits. You can get in there and start attempting.
I agree. I agree. And I guess when I say lowbrow, I suppose what I'm comparing it to in my mind is I have a background in illustration. I went to art school. Cool. And I felt like during that time, we learned a lot about art historically, and I've spent a lot of time in museums growing up. So I see, like, in a lot of ways, I feel like Etch-a-Sketch kind of like really fits within the frame of artists and social media. And there's certain type of, like, I don't know, like a caste system in a way of like, there's like the artists that post like the stuff online, and then there's like, in a lot of ways I feel like the inaccessible feeling gallery work that you see in the museums that just feel like kind of distinctly separate from the average person. Like that's like, there's a bit of an unrelatability to a lot of the work that I see in a museum where like, you know, you walk in and you see like a Caravaggio and you're like, oh my gosh, this was like, you know, this work from the 16th century or whatever. And it's like, I look at all of that and I find it impressive and amazing, but I don't necessarily connect with it in a way that I find like what I guess what I would say is more, I like that you said accessible more than lowbrow, because I don't want to speak down in any way. I think that when I say lowbrow, it might sound like I'm assigning a negative connotation to it, but I kind of like that that I see it as lowbrow, because it is one of those things that I think people can relate to more, because it is a very common, at least American experience, to have used one of these and to have, you know, attempted to make something on it. So I try to tackle sometimes some highbrow subject matters, and by highbrow, like interpreting the masters, and trying to do particularly intricate things. And there's a kind of a fun juxtaposition in that. But then on the other hand, I also do a lot of like pop culture stuff because Etch-a-Sketch is such an inherently pop culturally related medium. I mean, this toy was featured in Toy Story and Elf. It's something that was in most people's stockings or under their Christmas tree at some point in their lives. And it's kind of akin to maybe making art with like Crayolas or Light Bright or Rubik's cubes. Like there's just something that's very kid friendly about it, and colorful and bright. Even though the work I do is grayscale, the canvas, you know, the frame of it, its inherent frame is just such a bright cherry red. And I think it kind of helps to soften the edges a little bit. Even if you're seeing something just like crazy intricately detailed on it, when you see that it's framed by just such a friendly red screen, it's almost like it's like more approachable.
Yeah, and it's certainly iconic. Like you see it in instant recognition, right? It does. I'm sure pretty much every American, it like takes you to some point in your childhood, maybe even a frustrated point of trying to make something happen in there. Like diagonals were never my friend. Usually the or circular objects, and watching you do it, it's pretty mesmerizing. I talked to somebody who is as a YouTuber, and they described, I think, what you would do as competence porn. It's somebody who is just amazing at what they do, and it is just so, I don't know, soothing to watch. It's almost like ASMR for your eyes, I guess. Watching you create these things, it's so bonkers. But you know what really kind of interests me is that like every technical field or even artistic field, they have their own little world, right? Their own nomenclature, their own things. And you were talking about the technical aspects of it. That had never even came into my brain to think that like different makes and models, different years would have different attributes. It started making me think like, well, what exactly is different? Is it like the slop in the controls? You mentioned the thickness of the line. Is it like the sharpness of the image that you can produce? Like what are the differences?
Yeah. Oh gosh, they are innumerable. I just, if cosmetically speaking, you first off, you have 4 standard sizes that have been.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Like this is the one. There's actually There's more than 4. Like there's the one that I'm wearing on my necklace right now. This is functional. So this one I don't personally like using, but there's a friend of mine who specializes in this size, and that to me is like next level because my little fingers just can't even, like, after a while.
What is that thing, like 2 inches by 2 inches? It's so small.
Yeah, it's even less than that. I think it's like 1.5 at its width. Like it's so if you're considering the size of the frame being like 1.5 inches, then the screen is like what, like 1 by 3/4 or something crazy small like that. Whereas for this one, it's like, I think it's like 1.5 by 2.5, something like that. And like one cool thing, so this is known as the pocket size, and they started manufacturing it in like the mid 2000s, I would say, maybe like actually early 2010s. And it was downsized from what was also called the pocket. So this kind of replaced it. It was one of those like shrinkflation kind of situations for Etch-a-Sketch.
Shrinkflation, I love that.
But what's cool about this size is that I like that it's actually a little bit smaller. It allows me to make my work just a little bit more accessible to people because it takes me moderately less time since it's a smaller canvas space. But the aspect ratio is wider than any other variant available. So there's this pocket, and then there's one that's a little bit bigger that's also known as the pocket. There is an Etch-a-Sketch artist community, and we might call it the Ohio Art Pocket because back in the day, Ohio Art owned Etch-a-Sketch. They owned it for its first 55 years, and now it's owned by Spin Master, which is, you know, a huge toy company. And it was actually Ohio Art that shrunk the Etch-a-Sketch down a little bit more. But Spin Master, when they inherited Etch-a-Sketch, this is the iteration of the pocket that they used. So this is the pocket, then there's another pocket, then there's the travel which came out in the early 90s. And then there's the classic, which is the size that people generally are most familiar with, at least historically speaking. That's the one that was made since day one. They actually did shrink that one in like the mid 2000s. But yeah, that's the one that people know and love. And I think if there were ever an Etch-a-Sketch that would stand the test of time, that's the one that people are going to like forever remember. But these days, I feel like the kids, the ones they know the most is like this size, which actually this one's a little bit smaller than it.
Oh, wow.
So this size is known as, surprisingly enough, the world's smallest. And it's functional. And I swear, whenever I post videos online, there's like a 20% chance someone would be like, have you seen the world's smallest Etch-a-Sketch? And I don't know why this is the size that like Gen Alpha, Gen Z is like most colloquially familiar with, but like they know this Etch-a-Sketch. They are acquainted with it. And so, barring just the differences in size, there is a difference in materials that have been used within the Etch-a-Sketches that the average consumer would probably never be aware of because they probably only use one Etch-a-Sketch in their entire life. They're not acquainting themselves with hundreds of different units over the course of a 5-year period. So, like, for example, I can show you, this is an Etch-a-Sketch that's partially disassembled. The posts on this Etch-a-Sketch are made of plastic. So about like 4 or 5 years ago, they changed some of the materials inside of Etch-a-Sketch, probably for economic reasons, but also for safety reasons. So I'm a little dubious about it because I just so acquainted from it from an adult perspective that I'm like, I don't see how this is any safer than it was before. But like the quality of even just like the knobs, and like these used to be metal posts instead of plastic. And so now when I try to like remove the knob, of course I just have like a cup full of Etch-a-Sketch knobs right at my arm's length.
As one does.
When I try to remove the knobs from these, I literally take a pair of butter knives, and because it just allows me like even a pair of scissors is like not enough to like wedge between, and then I like launch this knob off the Etch-a-Sketch. It literally skyrockets every time I remove it, and it like hits the ceiling and ricochets. Someday I'm going to break my computer monitor. I just know it. Like it's going to happen. And so like those are the things that like I become intimately acquainted with, like the internal mechanics, because I'm disassembling them to make the art permanent. And like when I disassemble, I remove the powder from inside. I can notice different ratios of the materials used inside of the unit. Like inside there's 2 main substances. There's aluminum powder, and there is polystyrene beads. So these like little tiny plastic beads, which are designed to like, when you shake an Etch-a-Sketch, it kind of sounds like a maraca. That's because there's like all the little plastic beads in there that are kind of helping to keep the powder mobile and keep it from clumping. So when you shake the drawing, you're actually having like aluminum deposits re-adhere onto the screen. So it's so even stuff like that, like I can tell sometimes if like the ratio is off because it may not erase as well, or like even on this one, you could kind of see some like gray darkness here, and there's like a weird streak. It almost looks like a comet went across the screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
And that's because there's like kind of a shadow cast by the stylus in the inside. So it's like there was like a trail. And these are the things that me and other Etch-a-Sketch artists who've been like in this for as long as I have, like we just know. And so like sometimes when we would go to a store, it would be the shake test. You would shake the Etch-a-Sketch and see like how sufficiently does it erase, because that could give you a decent barometer without even trying it of the quality of the functionality of the Etch-a-Sketch. And this is one of those things that like the average consumer, honestly, I don't think this applies to them. They're not going to be concerned about these things. But if you're going to be spending multiple hours on a drawing, it would be like choosing the canvas that you're going to be painting on. Do you want to invest more time in sourcing a well-functioning canvas that will do everything you want it to do? Or do you just pick the first one that you can find and then find out that you're going to need to spend 5 hours more on the drawing because the canvas isn't cooperating with you in the way that you want it to? Like there have been times where I decided to dig my feet in and be stubborn and say like, I can't go to the store right now. Like you can even see behind me, like, look at that. That's a stack of classic Etch-a-sketches. And those, I just have them over there. I'm organizing right now, but like it's because I was trying to look for the right one for the task I wanted to do. And so I had a live stream the other day where I was working. I never use the classic size during live streams because it's just kind of clunky, and I usually stream through my phone and I need to be like farther away. But I hosted I did a rare classic Etch-a-sketch drawing, and so I didn't yet pick a canvas for it because it's so rare for me to do that. So my audience just watched me like sitting on the floor, like, no, not that one. No, not that one. Maybe. No, not that one. Like, and it's just like there are different Etch-a-sketches that can be right for different situations. Like, I might want one that kind of produces a lighter line where it's just not as stark and dark. And that could be really nice for working on a portrait of a person because you don't want the lines to look really heavy or really intense, because it can be kind of unflattering if you're trying to draw subtle lines to connect different facial features. But then there are other times where like I've done this series where I follow along with Bob Ross, and I'm just very stressed the whole time because Bob goes at a quick pace. And
he's booking.
Yeah, he is absolutely. I mean, when you were talking about like competence porn, like he's absolutely a beautiful ASMR example of that, where he's a master of his craft and he makes it look so blithely easy, right? And I try to follow along at Etch-a-Sketch, and the thing is, his lessons were not designed to teach for Etch-a-Sketch, and it's a one-line medium. So sometimes he'll be like, I'm gonna paint this tree over here. I'm gonna go over here, and I'm like, and I'm just, and anyways, I bring up the Bob Ross streams because I need an Etch-a-Sketch that's darker so that my audience can easily see what's happening on screen.
Gotcha.
I need there to be like good contrast. So there are certain Etch-a-sketches that I've set aside with that in mind, where it's like, this is going to be the right one. Because there was one that I did, and this is something that you can notice it if you go back to the episodes, but no one's ever commented on it. But like episode 5, I used an Etch-a-sketch with thinner lines, and I sometimes wonder if that even affected like the performance of the video, because the contrast like wasn't as good and it wasn't as easily discernible. And it still did like really well and people really liked it. But I look at it and I'm like, I notice an inconsistency in quality of the unit that I selected for this task. So there are just so many different minute differences beyond cosmetic that can be, detrimental, beneficial, and sometimes like there are units that I would never want to use for like a certain type of commission that are perfect for others. Like, oh, this would be great for a logo because it's got really dark, thick lines, and this logo is very thick and a heavy typeset. And it's nice to. I keep a library of Etch-a-sketches. I probably have like 500 in my possession, because you never know when you're going to need the right unit. And like, I did some work for Netflix in 2020. They had a movie come out called Spiderhead, and it was featuring Miles Teller and Chris Hemsworth. And in the movie, the character that Miles Teller played was an Etch-a-sketch artist. And so I had a prop master at Netflix reach out to me, and they wanted me to work specifically on 90s units, which was curious because the movie doesn't necessarily define an era, but they wanted like the larger screen. And thankfully, this is when my Etch-a-sketch hoarding tendencies like truly came in clutch. there's this video going around of like the dad who has the piece of wood that fits perfectly under the bed, and it's like that feeling of that piece of junk you've been holding on to for so long.
Vindication.
Well, yeah. So I had all these old etch-a-sketches, and it was perfect because I didn't need to like. There actually was a little bit of a wild goose chase because they needed 6, and so I bought like $300 worth of etch-a-sketches on eBay and just wildly like buy it now, and had them shipped to my house immediately because the turnaround for the project was like crazy. And I had like most of the etch-a-sketches I needed, but wanted like 1 or 2 backups just in case. And then most of the ones that I got, they weren't right for the job. Like they could have been better for other projects, some of which I've used down the line. There were 1 or 2 that I accidentally bought the wrong size, which is crazy because it's like I'm the expert in the room on buying the correct one, and I still managed to screw it up. And there's just so many like minor cosmetic differences. And that's the kind of thing where it's just like I never know when that's going to happen, where somebody's going to need like, usually it's a company like where their turnaround times are insane, and they're like, overnight, can you make us a video on this size etch-a-sketch? And it's like, I'm not going out to Target, and if I go to Target, they're not even going to have what I need because you want this size, and this size stopped being manufactured in 2007, so I need to like dig into my archives. So I'll go to thrift stores, and the first section I always want to go to is the kids' toys section, because that's where you find the good stuff. That's the rare opportunity you have to find a vintage unit and test it in person before buying, versus like thoroughly inspecting photos taken from someone's blurry iPhone 4 on eBay.
Right.
Like, yeah.
What's so funny is you're talking about all this stuff, and I love it, but it struck me, these are problems that probably 200 people on the planet have. Have you ever thought about that? Like, I mean, while it is this ubiquitous toy that we all play with, and there's probably millions of units produced every year, you're one of like this small handful of humans on the planet that actually think about these things or go through these trials. Like, you ever think about yourself as like being so unique on the planet in that respect?
I think most of the time I take it for granted because I'm in such an insular world. And then a lot of the people I interact with live in this same world as me, where they also participate in making etch-a-sketch art. But I don't think it's any more obvious than when I talk to my boyfriend about my day, because yeah, he is very much an opposite side of the spectrum. Like, he's not even a career artist. He is a physicist. So like, we live on different planets. He's planet physics and I'm planet art. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, any problem I bring up related to art, freelance, etch-a-sketch, they're all alien to him. And likewise, I mean, he'll tell me about his corporate day, and I'll just be like, whoa, that's weird. Like, I don't know how you do that. That's from another planet. And it does feel unique is a good word for it, because even within my small community of Etch-a-Sketch artists, there are only 2 of us doing it full time. And of the 2 of us doing it full time, we have taken it different directions. So like the other person who does it full time, his name is Christoph. He lives in Los Angeles. He focuses predominantly on live event work. So he will do live Etch-a-Sketch drawings at events, like as live performances. And I've done a little of that, but that's not the focus of what I do. I think what I focus on more is the commission-based work. I teach workshops. I do a lot of like videos for companies, and then live streaming, and then like a little bit of like merchandise and print sales and stuff. And those are kind of what comprises my revenue stream. And then thankfully in the last few years, with my social media channels growing a lot, I do get a little bit of like ad revenue from YouTube and stuff like that, and Patreon. So those are all like different ways that I cobble together a nice classic freelance income, which I think a lot of artists even off Etch-a-Sketch can relate to, is we're used to wearing a lot of hats.
Oh yeah. Every artist I talk to, I was talking to a guy, Michael Cthulhu is what he's called, and he makes big giant swords, like gigantic swords. So he says, like, well, he'll talk to different people and they'll say, through the natural conversation, what do you do? And he'll say, I make big giant swords for a living. And he said, like, when he's talking to regular people, they focus in on, oh, you make big giant swords? That's so crazy. He said when he talks to other artists, they say, oh, you make a living doing the thing? Yeah, so it's very funny, like, the things that people focus on. So yeah, I've talked to enough artists to see that, like, oh, I'm actually supporting myself through my art is a fairly unique thing. And then the fact that you found an avenue to do that, I think, is even more unique inside of there, which is awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's definitely a hustle. And that's what I always tell artists and non-artists alike. Usually if I tell people that it really depends on the situation publicly. There are times where I'm at a dinner party or something and we're just making small talk and somebody will ask, oh, what do you do? And usually I might just say freelance art at that point, because what ends up happening, and it's a fantastic problem, but what ends up happening is if I say, oh, I'm an etch-a-sketch artist, they're like, what? And then that will be the focus of like the next 20 minutes. And then like nobody else at that corner of the table will have any input about anything. And it's very sweet. And I'm very appreciative of that. I'm incredibly grateful that people are genuinely interested and excited about what I do, because I'm interested and excited about what I do.
Right.
But it does cause a little bit of a thing where it's like, oh, but like, what about you? And they're like, I'm a pharmacist. Like, it's cool too. Like, that's important. And I feel like, come on, you're doing great. Like, and it's actually that really could be, that could actually go even into tricky territory on the internet. Like, because every day I posted stuff about my life as an etch-a-sketch artist, which, like, in my insular little world is a unique thing that I'm just so used to living as my day-to-day life. And somebody could be scrolling through TikTok and they'll hear me talking about this random French etch-a-sketch or whatever. And it could absolutely ruin their day, because they're like, how the heck does this person make a living? Like, how dare they be happy, having fun? I just clocked in 14 hours doing XYZ. And it never became more apparent until I did my student loan journey, where I was like, all right, TikTok, what if I did this crazy thing to pay off $13,000 in debt? Let's do it. And then it was working. Like, in the beginning, everyone was like, you're dumb. Like, that's the stupidest idea. Why don't you, like, get a job? And then, like, the money started coming in, and people are like, you're a thief. You're stealing from the hardworking citizens of the world. How dare you have the audacity to be an artist and have fun and make money? I hate that you do those things. And as it kept progressing, like, the hatred toward me, like, increased a lot by just, a lot of people who just, they don't like seeing people having fun and blithely making money from their perspective, even though from my perspective, there was nothing blithe about it. I was hustling 110 hours in that month for the stream and the documentation, and I ended up getting sick from, all the time I spent streaming. And like, when I was off camera, I was trying to like cobble together food like a gremlin, just like figuring out how I'm going to eat. And but I think that, like, the internet, a lot of people, well, you get to bask in anonymity and everything, but a lot of people don't like, I would say artists in general, but more specifically artists that look like from the surface they're succeeding and they're having fun, because it means that these are people that are, like, in some capacity living their best life. When a lot of people right now, like, it's kind of like read the room in a way. like economically it's not a great time for a lot of people, and so they could have a crappy job that they're not happy with or whatever, or just have a life situation that they're discontented about, and then
Mm.
go on TikTok and then scroll through their videos and then see me just being like, hi, I just did it, it's cool with Disney, and it's like, screw you. I kind of like don't blame them in a way, because like I can't control who sees my stuff. And so I feel like in real life scenarios, I'm able to gauge like, all right, is this person having a bad day? I'm not gonna, I'll just kind of say like, I'm a freelancer. That way it's just kind of like, well, what about you? This conversation isn't about me. Like, let's all have a nice communal conversation. But I do find that I feel like I encounter a lot of like discontent, like almost like I feel like the general public might sometimes be rooting against me. I have like a crazy amount of support, but I also feel like I have a lot of people who just like, it's not about me, it's about the concept of me. It's about like, they don't want someone to like pick up their life and pursue a silly fun thing, and that could be like, it doesn't even have to be silly, it could just be like they might feel a similar amount of discontent toward a painter, or or someone who's a dancer. Like, it's just like something about like the creative professions, there's so many connotations associated with it that I think those who aren't in the craft or doing the thing look at it and see it as like, oh, well, if you love your work, you'll never work a day in your life. Or like, especially influencers, like, the word influencer, if you say that on Reddit, it's like everybody sharpens their pitchfork, because there's nothing worse as an occupation than being an influencer. And I think that term has changed a lot. It's funny because I feel like a lot of people who might fit under that term, influencer, would rather call themselves content creator. Like, we're all like trying to distance ourselves from that concept, when at the end of the day, I am technically an influencer. I influence people to think about Etch-a-Sketch, and that's great. I love it.
Man, you covered a lot of ground. You cover a lot of ground fast, Jane. I'm gonna put that out there. I have so many questions about all this stuff. I think I'm gonna pick up right where you left off. The influencer thing, I was thinking about it really mostly in this moment. What was the difference between, let's say in the 90s, right? There were no influencers, but we had celebrities, which essentially was the same thing, right? I'm a celebrity. Either I'm on TV, I'm in movies. There were some people that were just famous for being famous, whatever, and that's essentially what it is, right? I have some amount of notoriety and people will sponsor me to do things. Or I'll get sponsorships from here or there. I'll pick up commission work because of it. I mean, it's just another word for something that people have been doing forever, right? And nobody was, as you say, sharpening their pitchforks and getting their torches lit for celebrities back in the 90s, or at least I don't remember it.
It's funny because it kind of reminds me of something that we talked about earlier, where it's like, well, now the idea of celebrity is more accessible than it used to be. Like, I look at art in museums, and in a lot of ways, a lot of that work doesn't have that feeling of accessibility to me, because I think about like monarchies and, being commissioned by the queen to paint this cathedral. And that just feels like such an otherworldly kind of celebrity type of experience. Whereas nowadays, I think that the concept of celebrity especially is way more accessible, and I think way more of a blurred line. And it's something that people in the 90s, if you didn't like a celebrity or you got rubbed the wrong way by them, it was really easy to distance yourself from them. You would just not turn on your TV or not flip through a magazine. And now I feel like every time you unlock your phone, you're like kind of confronted with all of these things. If you're scrolling through a feed, if you're on Twitter, if you're on TikTok, you're kind of to a certain point, the feed can like curate a lot, but I think a lot of it is just like, it is interesting to think about. The concept of an influencer has been around for a long time, and maybe people just weren't as aware. I think a lot of things are like, people are less they might even assign their thoughts about what it was like in the 90s to people today. Like, I think in the 90s, a lot of people assumed, oh, you were on a TV show, you must have made it big. And even in the 90s, that may not have necessarily been true. Like, that's why there's like a lot of child stars and like one-hit wonders in music.
Oh, yeah.
And you could be a one-hit wonder back in the day and cobble together a career out of it. And I don't know how sustainable that might be today, unless you like had it good back in the day and you're like still riding that wave. But even the one-hit wonders, I think you usually had to find a way to pivot to like pay their bills. And people don't think about that. And people don't think like when I finished my student loan thing, people were like, wow, so like going forward, you're just going to be raising money for charity, right? And I'm like, in a perfect world, that would be great. I would love to use my powers for like the public good, but like in a real world, that was one of my bills that I just took care of. I have to feed myself. I have to live. And a lot of people assume like I got a job for Disney in like 2012. It was one of the first legitimate gigs I ever got. One of my first commissions I ever got. It was from Disney. And it felt very storybook. And a lot of people thought, and she lived happily ever after. And it's like, that was a gig. That the gig started, I did the job. The gig ended, I received the paycheck. And there was nothing after that. There were no residuals. There were no and I think a lot of people in the 90s, they would look at celebrities and assume like, oh, they got it made. And I think a lot of the people that we think of from the 90s, like the cast of Friends, yeah, they did have it made, probably, unless they bought one too many mansions or something. And so yeah, I think influencer culture has been around for decades, probably since like the 60s or something. It's like once we started publishing people in magazines, probably even before then. But I think today it's almost like a more democratized experience. And I feel like people use that word a lot when TikTok came out. It's like, oh, we're democratizing the content that we consume. It's no longer like, what does YouTube shove into our face on the recommended page? It's, oh, what do I like? And this starts showing me more of what I like. And so a lot of artists were just thriving in the beginning because it just felt more like a democratized space. And now it's just, anytime an artist brings up the word algorithm, it's usually not for a good reason. It's usually
negative
bad
connotation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking too, kind of along this subject matter, people on the internet, and it seems like a lot of the hate that I see, like you're talking about, is just based on envy. It's like, I want that thing you have, or it's that, oh, like you said, I put in 14 hours, I had to work so hard, and the perception is, oh, you're doing this thing that you enjoy and it's fun, and it's not nearly as much work as what I have to do, so therefore you shouldn't have this thing. And I think what some people fail to realize is everybody pays for entertainment. Right? Even that person that works 14 hours, they go to the movies, right? Maybe they pay for a Hulu subscription or whatever. What are you doing? You're paying for entertainment. You're paying artists that create this thing you enjoy so that you can enjoy it. So
yeah,
the exact same thing that you're doing, you are creating something that people find entertaining, right? Everybody's got an entertainment budget, right? And they're just spending it on the things that matter to them. And it's just the perception of, you maybe didn't work in the same way I had to get this thing that you have, which is sad. Instead of cheering you on and being happy and joyous of like, hey, here's an artist putting amazing, creative, unique things into the world. It's, no, you should have to work harder. You should have to grind in this other way. Because virtually every artist I've talked to, you guys grind. You guys grind, and it is a ton of work. It's just not in the exact same way that I do it, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think, I agree with everything you said, because a lot of people devalue the labor that goes into social media, especially. They think that it's just as simple as like, oh, I could do that. It's kind of like when somebody walks through a modern art museum and they see a canvas with like a dot on it, and they're like, they devalue it because it seems easy to do. And there's, I would never tell anybody who does backbreaking labor that my work is harder than theirs. I think it's something that I'm very grateful that I get to stay in the comfort of my home. And I recognize the privilege in that, that we've been getting really bad snow out here and I work from home. Like there's immense privilege in not having to deal with traffic. But there are pros and cons to every workplace, to every job. And I think a lot of people lack empathy when they immediately, like, I think a lot of people will just write someone off. Like, they'll find a way, they'll put them in a box and they'll be like, oh, okay, well, what this person does isn't really, it's not really physically difficult. It's not really physically demanding, or you didn't need a special degree to do that. You didn't need a specialized skill. And so society kind of like devalues the contributions that person provides to the world. Like, I think about how it's kind of my job to convey the work that I do, not only to the general public, but also like to the people who hire me, because I need to constantly defend how much I'm being paid. And and it's also a kind of tricky position, because I would love to educate the public more on like, oh, well, these are some of the downsides of freelance, but it's a slippery slope of like, well, you can't complain when you're perceived to be in a good position, even if you're like airing out legitimate grievances. It's like if the public perceives you to be successful and you start saying like, yeah, but I worked 12 hours yesterday and I made $0 because everything I did was me pitching for jobs that I may or may not get. People will be like, oh, here's my world's tiniest violin, go cry me a river. Someone threw food at me through the drive-thru yesterday, like, so it's just, it's a tricky balance. And that's where I think that like having community of people who are also in that world is super important, because I think every artist or every content creator who's like in it to win it, who does this, not even necessarily full time, but who does it like as a passionate endeavor, they need people who are on that side of the fence. They need people who can empathize and who understand. Like I talk to my boyfriend and I tell him everything, and he's one of the rare people that I feel like I can be truly unfettered about like my grievances. If I had a bad day, he knows names, he knows everything. But he has this kind of stock response, which I appreciate. And it's always like, I am so glad I am not in your career. And it's like very validating, because it's like, then he'll tell me stories and I'm like, whew, am I glad I'm not doing what you're doing. And that's something that that's something I would never ask of the public, to like, I don't know, to sympathize and be like, boy, it sounds real rough for you. Because I understand intuitively that like I put out this like this version of me, Princess Etch, because she's a character. She's a facet of myself. She's a part of who I am. But it would be, I don't know, if I were to like go and make a video and just like publicly tell the world like all these like tough things, then I feel like it would be similar to like if a famous actor did that. And there are times when it's appropriate to do that. Maybe there's a good story. I told the story about a bad flight on YouTube, and I'm like, you know what? That's something that people can universally relate to in some capacity. And it doesn't mean that I'm just being like, my terrible job, it's just so rough. But I do have my people in my life that I'm able to like, just, to vent to about day-to-day things. Because at the end of the day, it's it's my dream career, but it's also a job.
Yeah. What popped into my head when you were talking about that was, so I've been in IT my entire career, right? I do some creative things inside of that and around that, but essentially I'm just one of those nerds. And I have done some consulting and stuff like that, and I've contemplated the idea of becoming just a consultant. But the idea of, and this is essentially what I think artists like you do, is betting on yourself. I'm betting that I will grind and put in the work and that the things will come. And that idea of that terrified me so much that I would never be just a consultant because that person working the drive-through, like you talked about, they know if they're just standing there for the amount of hours going through the motions, they're going to get X paycheck, right? The guy working at the factory, he shows up every day, he's going to get X paycheck. With artists like you have to bet on yourself every day. Like you said, 12 hours of betting on yourself that may or may not pay off. And that is freaking terrifying. Like that, intrinsically, that makes me cringe a little bit. I know you can't see it, but it like my body kind of like tightens up thinking about it. Like,
it's not for the faint of heart.
No, there is certain amount of bravery that I think people take for granted. That like, and again, Princess Etch, it is parts of you, right? But like, even when I do these podcasts, it's kind of an exaggerated version of me, right? Like, I'm not always this loud in my personal life, and this. Well, I am always this weird, but not always this loud and kind of, just asking weird questions. I take that back. I do ask weird questions. Anyway, it is a version of me, and that is a version of you, right? And it's
absolutely
this can't always be you, right? And so for people to assume that they know the human behind just the 4-second video or the 4-minute video or whatever it happens to be is always just kind of crazy. And I hope that people like you give them hope that they can maybe let those parts of themselves, kind of show a little bit. That's what I've learned. It's like the more you show who you really are and the things you really love, the more like-minded individuals you're going to attract. So maybe it'll give some of those people that are envious a little bit more license to get out there and try it and maybe find a little perspective, a little empathy.
And I definitely, I feel like it's worth emphasizing that I'm very grateful to say I have an incredible amount of awesome support. And,
that's killer.
The majority of the comments I get are really supportive, and and I'm very glad to be able to share my love, my unfettered love for this niche medium with the world. And I think, something that you just mentioned reminded me of this. Even if you spend all day betting on yourself, art is not a meritocracy. You could be the best one in the room, but a series of circumstances might make it where, somebody else goes viral instead. Someone else gets the gig instead. And with my little niche, it's a small world. So I often know if somebody reaches out for a job, if they're reaching out to other etch-a-sketch artists, I'm going to know the person by name who got the job, which is unique. I think most industries, they're big enough that if you pitch for a gig and someone else gets it, you're probably not necessarily going to know them. And I think that all we can do is the best we can and put our best foot forward. And I feel like every time I post online, it's like planting a seed. I don't know if it will ever sprout, when it's going to sprout, if it does. But some of the coolest opportunities I've gotten are from things I've posted that I thought were absolute failures. Like I did a job for Disney a few years ago, and I wouldn't say this job was a failure in any, but I did a job for Disney, and then I was in contact with the employee that worked there, and we were on the phone, and he was scrolling through my Tumblr, which, thank goodness, I kept my Tumblr for business purposes and wasn't just like, I don't know, shit posting memes all the time on it or something. But he saw me post a video that I had made with this indie musician in Canada. And it was kind of basically a pro bono job that I did. I didn't really know how to do video yet. And they reached out to me, and I I was very grateful for the knowledge I learned from that experience. And it was definitely a rocky one for me. And it was a lot of work. I was still in college when I did that video. And I wouldn't, they were great people and they were really nice. But I walked away from the experience a little resentful. It's not their fault. It was because I didn't get money. And that way it's their fault. But like, I also didn't like advocate for money because I was trying to learn a thing. So, I wouldn't blame them for that. But I looked back on that experience and then like the video went live and I was like, it better get 1 million views. And it did like, okay. Right. And I thought, okay, that was it. That was the end of that story. But then the Disney employee I was on the phone with was scrolling through my Tumblr and he saw this video. He's like, wait, you did this? What? We gotta do this. We gotta do this with Disney. Like, this is great. We would love to hire you to do something like this. And I'm like, oh my God, this wasn't like off or not. And there have been times where, and I'm the first person to tell artists like, your work is worth money. Don't do things for free if you don't have to. But there are exceptions to that rule. And every artist, I think they have to decide what's worth like, I hate to say the dreaded word exposure, but if you're calling the shots and you're comfortable with the parameters, then there are times when I think it is a sensible thing to test the waters, to try out a new idea, to take a risk, and be, working with a company and develop those relationships. Because like there have been a time or two where like I was featured in an article, but they wanted me to like draw a specific thing for it, and that kind of gives me like like, why can't you just share my portfolio? But then, maybe that specific thing is what landed me a gig down the line doing something else. Like, and so that's kind of like, that's the way that I see it. It may not necessarily pay out in that moment, but it's always taking risks. It's always rolling the dice. I try to be more calculated about what I do these days, but I also try to not be too methodical. I try to leave a lot of room for those inspiration moments, because I think that's where like some of my happiest, most magical, exciting experiences have come from, is just like leaving room for those times when a really cool idea pops out and I just like want to go all in on it. So
I love that. The idea of planting a seed, because I always write notes down, like tons of notes, planting a seed with everything we do, right? Because you don't know honestly what it'll grow into to bring something to you, but also, I always think like you never know how it's going to hit somebody else and what it's going to mean to somebody else. I think that's beautiful. But Jane, we are dangerously close to time, and so I want to be very respectful of your time. Don't want to eat too much of it. So right here at the end, I usually like to ask if there is anything you want to promote, or how do people find you on the internet? Like, what are your favorite methods for all of that stuff?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on my website, princessetch.com, and my username is @princessetch across all the major platforms. So you can check me out on Insta, TikTok, Patreon, Facebook. I might have an old MySpace somewhere around there. I don't know. But thank you so much for taking the time to learn about my craft and what I do and why I do it. It's really always an honor to be able to speak about my passion.
I can tell you love it, and it comes through every second that you are talking about it. I mean, you genuinely light up, and I think that's terrific.
Thank you.
I strive in my life to find something that makes me half as excited as some of the people I talk to, you included. So again, thank you for your time, and I'm going to hit stop on all this stuff.